She did a fine job with my introduction. Sometimes it's just too much stuff. It also means that I change jobs a lot. So I keep searching for my utopia. All right, and I don't know if it exists, but I keep trying. And so there's some people here that haven't seen me in a while, and I've really kind of taken a hiatus for myself and been working only part-time because after raising 7 kids and dealing with all the stuff that comes with it and the county shut down, I said, let me steal some time for myself. So I'm just working half-time right now with Fresh Start, and also I'm doing some local tenants, which is traveling or visiting doctor work at a day treatment program. Okay. So today, the conversation, I mean, it's contrast of brain development, the effects of healthy versus neglectful or abusive parenting. So the first half is neuroanatomy. And so I'm not going to give you a quiz at the end. I had a mishap with my computer, so normally I'd have my notes typed in it, so I might be peeking at notes sometimes because I killed my computer. And so I'm using one here from Potawatomi. So the reason I chose this topic was before COVID, when this conference was supposed to happen, remember it got postponed. And Dr. Earl Bracey and I spoke, and I said, what do you think I should talk about? You know, I don't want to just talk about meds. And he said, why don't you talk about the brain development and neglect? And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, so here we are. All right, so I'll get started. Oh, and another mention, it looks like there's a sign-in sheet in case people are trying to get continuing education credits at the entrance. So I wrote, clicker, beginning. And this is my beautiful niece, Mariah Weddle. Yay! Okay. We have made a connection now that she's all grown up, and I'm thrilled with it. It's only going to get better. Yes. Okay. So, see if it works. Down. Oh. There we go. All right. So. All right, so objectives that you'll learn about the anatomy of the brain and the function of important brain regions. So you're going to see some things listed we're not even going to tap into. I'm going to be focusing on the ones that they have done research and mostly imaging studies to see the difference in the brain development in people who had no exposure to abuse or trauma versus those who did. And this is children mainly. It speaks about, and this is basically a literature review. I didn't do any of this research, but I did a lot of reading, and it's mainly literature review. So you will learn about the anatomy of the brain and the function of important brain regions. Participants will learn how the environment and parenting influence learning, behavior, emotions, and physical health. Participants will be introduced to treatment options for trauma-exposed youth. So most of the people in here, people raise hands who are providers or with child welfare or, you know, those hands, because I'm guessing there might be some parents in here too. All right. And then how about those of you who are foster parents, treatment foster care? Okay. Parents who came through the schools? Okay, great. All right. So I'm not going to be trying to make this too scientific. It's going to be nice pictures. And if you ever download it, you can see. So most people know about the types of trauma, most of us in this room. And there's forms of maltreatment. It's physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional harm, exposure to family violence. They were mentioning that about how there's a risk to the family, and then neglect. Research has shown that neglect is the most prevalent form of maltreatment. And so there's different types of neglect. And you know, in my work, we're often challenged about how to, you know, our mandatory reporting, how do you, sometimes it's challenging to do the reporting of emotional neglect. That's the kind of stuff that happens behind closed doors, you know? You don't usually get to see it. And sometimes people aren't even aware that they're being abusive, the parents. Educational neglect, we are fighting that. Sometimes it's the school that's doing it because he can't come back until he's on medicine or something. Medical neglect and physical neglect. I think that's the one that's probably the most obvious in medical. But this medical also includes mental health. They keep trying to separate that, but the brain's connected to the body and makes everything else work, right? All right, so parenting styles. So these are responsive care and to serve and And return, which is a child has a need, they cry, they're hungry, a parent responds. A child is in distress, a parent soothes. A child's doing something that's risky or dangerous, the parent engages and kind of gives explanation and helps them know how to be safe or keep them protected. So sometimes, and when I did my research, it would show this 3 R's. Anybody ever heard of the 3 R's when it comes to responsive parenting? And the 3 R's are respect, response, and relationship. And so a big part of the issue of the relationship is engaging with the child, and that's even the infants. And then attunement. Attunement is the ability of the parent to be responsive to that child's signals. They're in distress, they're afraid, they're hungry. Sometimes they're just kind of disorganized. You know, times when you can't calm down an infant, you've done everything you were supposed to, and they're still freaking the heck out. Okay? So here are examples of what unresponsive care are. So the names are really pretty direct and clear. Occasional inattention. And so this would be that someone is, once in a while they're paying attention. You know, we'll get some parents, and maybe they're depressed, maybe they're using drugs, maybe they're working too many jobs, maybe they're in a domestic violence situation, and there's times they're tuned into the child, and they're affectionate, and they're cooing, or they're meeting their needs, and other times it's like stay in your room, or they put them in the room and they don't let them out, or they're not available. They may be gone. And the effects of that is what's key. It could be growth promoting. If the occasional, it could be growth promoting, because sometimes when you have to learn to let a child learn how to soothe themselves. You know, people can never put down their baby, or the child's clingy and they want to sleep with them all the time. There's times that you must help the child be able to soothe and calm so that they can develop emotional regulation, okay? If you're always doing it, then they need someone else to do it. If it's not someone else, it's going to be something else, like drugs or alcohol or sex, something, okay? Effects of chronic understimulation often leads to developmental delays and it can be caused by lots of factors. So it could be the parent's mentally ill or substance abusing, and that's the example I gave, what I meant to use for this one. And that could be the reason why that that is chronic understimulation, like a mentally ill parent, or because someone's working a couple of jobs and kids have to stay home and keep kind of secret. But the risk is, and especially in the first few years of life, is developmental delays and deficits. And that's kind of what the point of this is in the contrast. And then as you get more advanced to severe neglect in a family context, the risk of that is that there's a lot of adverse impact. And so this is when we get into things talking about like the ACE study. I mean, this is studying adults, but that it can cause developmental impairments, and it can also cause threat to health and overall survival long term. So there's severe neglect in an institutional setting. Sometimes we like to think that we don't have institutions anymore, you know, like for example, shut down county, you know, and they reduced the number of people in there, but we send them to residential treatment facilities. They might be in shelters for a long time. They may be in juvenile justice over in detention because there's no place left. And if this is something that happens frequently, and especially if it's happening young, I think our country would really work hard if that's not happening to our infants and toddlers. But if they, you know, and so they may be getting their needs met, and you'll hear this more like in Australia or Romania. I've had kids when I was working at Aurora that was the scenario that they adopted this child, and it was very, very severe, and a lot of self-injury and learning deficits and trouble connecting in emotions. And the child had no words about what happened to him, because these things happen pre-verbal, okay? And so those risks are, like I said, they get their basic needs met, but they can end up having cognitive delays and psychological, an impairment in their psychological development. So now this is about development of the brain, and there's a lot of terms, and the point is use-dependent brain. So this is stuff, and you'll hear from Bruce Perry and other people who have studied like developmental neurology and psychology, when speaking of the brain development. So this is for all of us, if you use certain parts of the brain in those early years, and especially in that first couple of years where the brain grows significantly in the first 2 years, then you get the neural networks made, so the connections start being made. And that gets into things like pruning. So whatever is not being used, then it decreases. So it's not activated. So that I talk to people sometimes like it's a computer. And so there's circuits that if you use them a lot, those are going to be more active, and whatever that skill or that function is going to develop, and it's going to develop in a normal way. But if it's not, can't hear me? We can't hear you. When the way?
It's hard to.
Here,
I want to try.
okay, so I can take this off too.
Yeah.
Okay.
You would like to.
I'll leave it right there while I'm looking at this. So,
Can you hear her?
can you'll hear me from this?
No, you're gonna.
Okay. Hello? All right. So I gotta do both. All right. We're gonna see if my neural networks are working. So use dependent. So like if you're not stimulating a child's speech in that first year of life, in the first 2 years of life in particular, then they're gonna have some delays and dysfunction in speech. Same with, they've done some studies, children who have been raised in the dark, like in a cave. I had a kid when I was working on the reservation, very similar. The family was homeless and they lived in a cave. And his speech had not been developed, and he was about 5. He did a lot of pointing, like he appeared like he was autistic, but he wasn't. He had not been stimulated. And so he was in the dark. They luckily found him wandering on the highway to go after his little brother who had wandered out in the diapers, and the 2 boys were found. But he just was really quite nonverbal. And just to think of it, there was no parents there either. They left him in the cave. But they'd been living there for over a year. So the repeated trauma. So we're talking about like neglectful or abusive parenting. It's like I call it like a booster, a jump. So, or a catalyst with my chemistry. Here we go. Like a catalyst is a good word, or an enzyme. An enzyme makes a reaction happen. A catalyst helps it even happen faster. And so repeated traumas can it will sensitize that neural network, that reactivity. And we know that about our kids we've worked with, who snap into anger, who knock something down, who snap all of a sudden, who hit something. And it's like he was just fine, and now he changed. And people say, oh, is he bipolar? Is he psychotic? Well, no, because of the repeated traumas, that network to the midbrain is very rapid. And it's automatic because it's been sensitized, okay? And the thing to know is that some of this is happening in utero, because mom is in a high stress stimulator, I think you get more cortisol. So that child's nervous system is driven more by the sympathetic nervous system. Brain plasticity, that's about when it can change, where you can help things change. And so the part of the brain that's best at plasticity is the cortex, the newest part of the brain. So we get kids, when I tell these stories, I said to Jermaine when I was taking this job, because as an adoptive mother and the dramas I've had with my babies I love, is I don't know if I'm the right one, because I might tell people don't adopt right now the way I'm feeling. And I got over that. But the fact is that plasticity of the cortex still exists. And so to keep parents, and I have a lady out here who I've been talking to, a treatment foster mother, and dealing with the difficulties with that reactivity and that anger and that moodiness and irritability and stealing and the lying and all those things that we'll get with our traumatized children who have been abandoned and removed and placed one place or another. You get that, and that's hard work. And so you may not see the positive outcome later on, because we're getting them while they're in the midst of that, and they don't have words for it, because the things that happened or did not happen happened before they were verbal. They can't explain it. It's just what I do. It's because you made me. You looked at me funny. Okay? So the plasticity is the cortex can continue to develop. So the hope is that if we give them that structure and consistency and bonding and attunement
and education and therapy, all that, that there can be growth and improvement with being able to inhibit those urges. They might want to hit, but they might catch themselves and say, wait, let me go for a walk instead, okay? So I'm saying keep hope. There's sensitive periods in the development, especially in this first year or two of life, where, like I mentioned, about vision and speech. So for the development, so that pruning happens, so the networks, it's like a muscle getting exercised, and if you don't exercise it, you miss the opportunity to develop it fully. And so there will be a deficit. Is that making sense? Okay. Epigenetics. I'm not going to get very much into epigenetics. Epigenetics is a study of the effects of how your behavior and how your environment can be changed based on how your genes work. And so these things can be reversible. It's not like it's your DNA that you automatically pass it on, but then you guys know some of them about the things when they talk about the telomeres and the tips of the nerves, of the DNA molecule, and that they can get frayed, or it's sort of like an electrical wire. They can get frayed and they don't signal as well. And so they talk about that, but that's really stuff that's in the research. And it can get scary, because when you look at it, it's like, oh, well, now I'm just stuck. My mother was this way, and I'm stuck this way, and that's not true, because we still have brain plasticity, and it's not really that it changes your DNA. What it does is it might lead to earlier cell death or things like that, which probably is what's involved with people having more chronic illnesses who have a history of trauma and abuse or neglect. All right, here's the brain. So I just want to see this, and we can reflect back to it when you have questions. That's why I have that here. But in general, we have the frontal lobe, which is the newest part of the brain, the neocortex. Down here is our hind brain. So there's the cerebellum, that's the pons. Those do the automatic things. So your respiration, your body temperature, your blood pressure. If you had to think about things like that, we'd all die. Thank God it's automatic. Then the midbrain, which you can't see right here, you'll see in the next picture. That's the one that deals with, that area is really involved in that trauma that we talk about, and memory, visual memory, working memory, and the parts I'm talking about that has to do with behavior and mental health risk. And then the cortex is a higher brain. So if a message can go from the midbrain to the high brain, then hopefully that means we can inhibit impulses, we can use some rational thought, we can do problem solving and better decision making. The issue is, as we move forward, sometimes that connection's not happening because of the lack of it being stimulated and growing during that time of pruning. Oh, I'm pointing at you guys. Okay, so this is a mid-sagittal, so now you can see the midbrain here. And I just want to talk a little bit about it and make sure I just had a few parts of the brain, but I want you to see this, and we're going to be focusing much more on the hypothalamus, the midbrain area, like I say, the thalamus, and the frontal lobe is a part of the cortex that we're talking about, and the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum connects the two hemispheres of the brain, the two sides. And those fibers communicate with both sides, the right and the left brain. So it started with the triune brain, which is the main three parts. So the brainstem being the hind brain, the limbic being the midbrain, and the cortex being the neocortex or the forebrain. And so they will say this is our amphibian brain, but it's progress, and up to we're supposed to have the most developed cortex. Maybe we're up there with the chimps and the gorillas and those guys, those primates, but it's the last that was developed when it comes to evolution, and the one that handles the most complex processing or thought processes. And then there's another one, and people know about Bruce Perry. Most people do. Anybody not hear of Bruce Perry? Dr. Bruce Perry is a MD and a PhD, and his focus is trauma, and it's been going on at least 20 years that he's been well known and has an institute. And this picture is really good because it can tell you the different functions of the brain. So in the brainstem, like I mentioned, those automatic responses that we need for survival. The diencephalon, he brings in a diencephalon because it's in between the two, but it's because this is about arousal and sleep. And a lot of our children that we work with are impulsive and hypervigilant, you know, a lot of, I'll say hyperactivity, but they're overstimulated, okay? And so it involves movement and appetite. And so here in the limbic system, memory, reward, bonding, so that's getting an attunement, attachment issues, and emotions, being able to regulate them or not. But it's, and the emotions that are going to be the most intense are usually the ones that are negative, connected to negative or traumatic experiences or memories. But that's why flashbacks happen, because some of the memories are visual memory. So something that happened, it can come right back, and it could just be a trigger driving by a house where you were abused before, and they feel all those experiences, and they're in the flashback, like it's real. And then this is the part we want to help develop, if we can soothe some of this. They were talking about the medicines in one of the talks. I don't know if you guys came into the panel, and somebody poked me from behind about medicines and doctors giving medicines. And I'm like, but if I don't soothe you, you can't do that. So they can talk, what? But all your foster parents or parents of kids, if you know that sometimes we have to have help, and sometimes it is treating a clear diagnosis. Another time we're treating what the structural and functional problems are that started from neglect and or abuse. And often, it's much more often it's neglect. We can have well-intended parents who don't really know how to parent, or they're consumed with their own mental illness or stressors in life that they're not stimulating. I had one woman say, well, she was okay, but I took her to the emergency room because she was just staring at the ceiling, and I didn't know why. She didn't do nothing. She was just staring. And then when you find out with this mother, she wasn't stimulating. She wasn't talking with the child, engaging. She met her needs. She fed her. She clothed her. If she burped, she had to do that. But she wasn't playing and cooing and doing things that get her attention. So the child just was kind of staring because it was lack of stimulation. So this mom didn't intend to do that. She didn't know. She figured I took care of all the basic needs, okay? And some really, really depressed or mentally, other mental illnesses parents, they think that that's enough. I'm not mistreating my child, but when I am depressed or I'm dealing with abuse or I'm dealing with psychosis or my substance issues, I'm not so much in here. I'm kind of stuck in between these areas myself, constantly looking for reward to reinforce me. This takes a lot of effort and concentrated effort that you want to work on these things. So she was well-intended. She was identified as a neglectful parent and had to get some help and all those requirements that they talked about that she had to do. But it wasn't that she wanted to do harm to her child and didn't love her child. We are really challenged a lot with that because we can't just let the children be in a situation that may be detrimental to them. And that's that conversation that we're having. I was sitting there thinking, we're talking about the problem, we're talking about the problem, we're talking about the problem. Yeah, we're talking about the problem. Okay, and yes, we reconstruct and redevelop and recreate, yes, but what about the 13-year-old boy today? And so how do we work within what we have? And I think it's our education and being aware of ourselves and the stuff that we bring to our work. Because I experienced that, and I'll get into my story, but I experienced that with a therapist who was making a lot of judgments about my children and the household early on. And I had to get rid of her. I told her, you're in your books, you're stuck in the book. Here's the real life. So anyway, the brainstem, the parts of the brainstem. I'm not going to really talk about the medulla oblongata or the pons very much. And the cerebellum I really talked about. Well, that's for balance and coordination, fine motor movement. And the reason I'm bringing this up, because these are parts of the brain that end up with some deficits or poorly developed, and we see those results in the life and the functioning of the child, which we'll get to. So the cerebellum also releases GABA. I don't know if people know about GABA. It's a neurotransmitter, alpha GABA aminobutyric acid. and it's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. And so it gives calm, and it soothes the nervous system, so it kind of calms down the firing. Firing happens, but it's not as excitable. Well, a drug that we use that can do that is benzodiazepines, like Ativan and Xanax, but so does alcohol. But anyway, the brain naturally has GABA, and it releases it, and it's kind of like a modulator in the nervous system when it's too activated, if things are happening in a normal functioning way. So the PONS, I did have the PONS. It is a relayer of motor and sensory messages. So, and it's also, that's right, where the respiratory center is. So when they talk, when people talk about herniation, when they have a head injury, then you could stop breathing. I went really medical, hunko herniation, sorry. It went there. It triggered that memory. So medulla oblongata, it relays nerve signals between the brain and the spinal cord. And it is connected to vital functions like breathing, blood circulation, swallowing, but it makes sense because it goes down to where the midbrain is, and then further down to the spinal cord. The midbrain contains auditory, so hearing, and visual reflex centers. So then, next. The limbic system. Now this is what we talk about a lot when we talk about trauma-informed care. This system has several pieces. I won't talk everything, but basically ganglia, cingulated cortex, the septum, hypothalamus, hippocampus, and amygdala. These three are the main ones I'll be focusing on in the talk today. So the limbic system is considered the emotional part of the brain. And that's where urges, needs, emotions, attachment, self-perception is developed or transformed. And emotions are a combination of experience, perception, memory, and body chemistry. And we all know that because everybody can think of a song back like in high school or something like that where it was a really happy time or a really sad time, and you hear that song again, and all that memory comes back. You know what I mean? Yeah, we all have that. It's nice when it's the good ones, right? All right. Well, you know, a lot of people who've been through trauma, a whole bunch of bad ones come up. And the reason is that our brain, the midbrain in particular, is about survival. And so if I'm going to pay attention to things, I'm going to pay attention to what's going to put me at risk and danger more than what gives pleasure. But I also like pleasure, so I might try to get me some more dopamine so people will cope with that, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. So the hypothalamus is the neuroendocrine part of the brain. So this is where hormones and neurotransmitters come from in that area. And they regulate body temperature and glucose levels. But you know, it's the other ones like the serotonin, the norepinephrine, the dopamine as well. And the hippocampus, it plays a part in memory as well, and functions in learning and behavior inhibition. So behavioral inhibition, which means decreasing impulsivity. It helps you get to not be as reactive and to process the situation first before reacting. And it is associated with deficits in memory and cognitive impairments, and ineffective coping responses in children or people who had childhood trauma and maltreatment. And so it also can break down and affect how you experience your bodily sensations, and that could include smell and sound. So if someone's traumatized and there's a scent of cologne, that's the part of the brain that triggers the memory, and it can give a picture memory, and it can get the physical sensations of that same trauma happening. So then the amygdala, it's where emotions are processed, and it is involved in emotional reactions. So it has a role in controlling aggression, sexual behaviors, and mediating the fear response. So a lot of us, we've heard like a backfire of a car, right? And you jump, and then you go on. Well, let's say he's a Vietnam veteran, and he was there when a bomb went off near him, and he hears that backfire, might attack someone, might hit the ground, all right? So mediating the response. But because of the trauma, that it has a dysfunction, and there's a hyperreaction okay? Keep thinking. So cortex and prefrontal cortex. I talked a bit about the cortex, but so it's the last area that developed. A lot of times I've already just said things and I realize I have it written, I know it. And it controls complex functions like abstract thought, auditory processing, reflection, complex motor activities. And it also delivers the sensory and visual information that was from down below, like in the hippocampus and everything, up to there so that you're aware and you can react to it. And then the prefrontal cortex communicates with most structures of the brain, and it processes relevant input that's specific to whatever experience you're having. And so it's important in planning and judgment and controlling your impulsivity and creating meaning to a situation or an experience. And the corpus callosum, as I mentioned before, are the nerve fibers that connect the two parts of the brain to help the right and the left hemisphere communicate. And so the left hemisphere has to do with perception of experiences with language, logic, and analytical thought, like math. The right brain has to do more with, sensory communication. Okay, so next slide. All right, the stress response. So now the thalamus, I didn't describe it. It's a relay center. It communicates like messages coming from different parts of the brain. It's the relay center, and it has all the information that your body senses, with the exception of smell. And it has to be processed, all those senses have to be processed through the thalamus. I know if I'm going this way. Through the thalamus. And then it gets sent to the cerebral cortex for it to be interpreted. So it plays a role in sleep and wakefulness and consciousness and memory and learning. So the point is that when a stress response happens, and it gets processed and it goes through the thalamus and then to the amygdala, it's very impulsive and instant because it didn't go up to the cortex. And so that's for like people who are sensitized. That will happen. So when a kid says, well, I blacked out, or we say, oh, they're impulsive, and you say, why did you do it? And it's like, I don't know why. It happened automatically. It skipped over the process of going up to be processed and to be decided, is this the right response? What's the situation? How do I cope with it? The reactivity is boom, it's right there. And so the normal, healthier way is that it goes from the thalamus to the cortex and then back to the amygdala, because that's where the emotion is. The cortex decided what to do. So we all have been in a situation with a love relationship or at a store or with a boss, and you're aggravated and you really want to say a whole bunch of things, but it went to your cortex and it stopped you. Okay? So, but our kids sometimes don't have that. And so, you know, we try to teach them that, and I'd say we try to teach mainly by us doing it, but also sometimes we're using medicines. Also because the cortex develops more over life. You know, our boys, they're so impulsive. And so they're reactive, it's like it's not getting to that cortex. They're in this little cycle here. And it's like, you know, I want to drive fast. A guy got next to me, we're going to be racing. You don't think about why, and oops, there's a cop on the side of the road, right? A police officer. All right, so people have heard about the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Yes? All right, so the hypothalamus is where those neurotransmitters are, or neurohormones. That's cortical releasing hormone. Cortisol is released from some comes from our brain, and then some also comes from our adrenal glands. And that's when a stress response happens. So then the pituitary releases releasing or corticotropin, ACTH. My brain is adrenal corticotropic hormone, and that's where the adrenal glands get released. And so that's norepinephrine or epinephrine, and that's the stress response. And so cortisol is involved with the stress response as well as norepinephrine. And we'll talk a little bit about the point that cortisol levels can be really high. For those of us, we wake up in the morning, our cortisol levels are high, it's supposed to stimulate us progressively over the day, it's supposed to go down, we soothe, we go to sleep. People with a lot of repeated trauma, their cortisol levels don't even really peak in the morning, and they keep it low throughout the day. So then we have the struggles with alertness, and then guess what? They're in school and they're saying, oh, they're inattentive. But they're living at a high level because it's been stimulated so much that it's producing a lower level because it's a feedback. It's been overstimulated, oversensitized, that now it's producing less. And so they're not as alert. And then it doesn't go down like it's supposed to go straight down. It stays flat, so then it's hard to soothe and go to sleep. They're still activated. All right. So fight, flight, freeze response, and dissociation. So we go, fight, flight, freeze, or fight, flight, that fawn. I don't know who came up with the fawn, but most of us know about that. And the point is with trauma, this is the response that we see, the external response. They're going to be yelling or hollering, they want to fight, or they're going to run and get away. Or one of my sons, when my husband grabbed him, his knees buckled and he collapsed to the ground. He tried to get him to stand up, he collapsed again. That was the freeze response. It was just overload. And that's when the brain just says, I have to shut down, it's too much. Dissociation is when that's really severe. When you dissociate, it's more an internalizing experience. They're not aware necessarily what's around them. There's a loss of time. People talk about, I'm not talking about dissociative identity disorder. I'm talking about like psychogenic seizures, which we used to call pseudo seizures, okay? And that's when the instead of fight, flight, freeze, this is a response, when it's just so much and it goes internal. This is when they do it external, okay? So I'm probably, I want to I have 75 minutes-ish, 90 minutes. I want to spend at least 15 minutes talking about my experience with my children and the things we did, and then the kind of outcomes now that they're in their 20s, and then have time for questions and answers. So I'm gonna go a little bit faster through the end of this. So this is about, because of the lack of stimulation or overstimulation, they've shown people with chronic trauma has smaller cerebral volumes. So their cortex is smaller. Their lateral ventricles and then are smaller, but then also they have large cortical and prefrontal cerebral spinal fluid. So the point is the ventricles have more fluid, which is indication from imaging that means that the white and gray matter is smaller because now it's more fluid, okay? So that means they have smaller brains, right? And so the brain size correlates with the younger you are and the more chronic the abuse was, the smaller the brain measurements are. So when you think of that, all those connections that we were talking about are deficient. Doesn't mean every single one, it's just which one, right? But these are the things that put them at risk for different illnesses. So all these parts of the brain can be involved, and they show changes in size, mostly that they're smaller in neuroimaging studies with a history of childhood trauma. And so childhood maltreatment is associated with functional brain differences, so we talked about the size, and cognitive deficits. The functional brain differences are things that we see in school issues. So it affects academic performance. There's a tendency of lower academic performance. It could even affect the IQ. We know that that's not global, but it can. Memory, working memory, attention, and we know that one a lot. Inhibitory control, so impulsive or angry quickly. Emotional processing, so we call it mood dysregulation. Resting state, so when there's not a conflict, they're still firing and more activated than people who did not have any abuse or trauma in early childhood. And then their traumatic scripts are very different that run through their mind and can trigger them. There's issues with sensory processing and reward processing. And then there's some people who struggle with things like balance or sensory input, like through your feet, where you are in space, with cerebellum due to early childhood abuse or neglect. And I have examples of that. So different treatments. I'm not going to get in it too much. I didn't get my reference sheet done because I basically poured water on my computer and broke it. And so, so when I was going to go back to do that, my computer was dead. And so I'm going to get the references available, and if people really want references, I thought we could get a sign-in sheet. If people want me to email it to you, I will. It's only about 4 things that I really stuck with to look at. But the one that talks about these treatments I thought was quite good, and it's from Gateway, and another one was from a Harvard study, okay? So, catch up, I don't know if anyone knows these things. I mean, I know easily EMDR, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. So the catch-up and bio-behavioral catch-up is really a person goes into the home with the family, and you're not judging, you're observing, and every time mama does something good, you reinforce that what she did good. And then you move on to trying to encourage that so that, you know, just a dialogue or praising the child or touch, and you're really working with the parent and helping with that attachment development. All right, so this is the family. What time am I at? Yay, I made it. Okay, all right, so I am just not. So let me tell you about who these people are without their names. These are my babies. All right, I gave birth to 3 of them, and I adopted 4 of them. And the 4 I adopted have the same birth mother and father. They came, so this is our first, after the adoption, this is our first, we went to go take a family picture at Adoption Resources. It's called something different now. So we were all dressed up to go for our pictures, and this was on our deck before we left. And so at that time, 4, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, and 9. So it was like 3 sets of twins. Each of my birth children had a same age sibling. All right, so that's back in the day. And this guy, his look tells you about him now. It's like Kazi couldn't even fake it. Oh my God. It's like so anyway, I'm gonna say this. The police came to the house looking for him the day before yesterday at 6:30 because he's not following his probation requirements, which means to me that they're trying to arrest him. So that's the point. I'm just getting that 4. All right, so anyway, here it is, maybe 2018. So everybody, I mean, the older 2 were probably like 2021. They're all 26 to 21 right now. So those are my beautiful, they're all beautiful. We just have our dramas. They're blessed. That's not always good for a good-looking boy who doesn't really care except for his needs, but that's another topic. So anyway, I'll get to that. See, Mara, I didn't need all this stuff, did I? You knew that. So I'm going to tell you about the approaches. So I always wanted to adopt, meaning always, probably since I was an adolescent. And I grew up in a home with educated parents, but an alcoholic father, one of those functional alcoholics who was nice and then crazy, and then nice and then crazy. And that's how it was. And so that made drama within the household. So growing up, I decided that children needed to understand that it wasn't their fault and how to be able to be safe and secure and to be effective, because I would say my older 3 siblings were affected more. I was number 4 and there was number 5. And I just feel that they were affected a lot more. And I could see that early, like middle school age, what we called it junior high then. And so at 16, that's when I decided I wanted to be a psychiatrist because there was alcoholism in the family and I needed to know more than just the mind. I needed to know the body. I needed to know it all, right? So I knew I wanted to adopt children and I wanted to have siblings so they could have each other. So dating and with other guys, it would scare some men, you know. All right, so yeah, I want to have 4, and then I'm going to adopt 3 of them, you know. So I'm like, well, so, and I can do it without you there. So after you get some education, you realize you can. I said, half people get divorced anyway. And so, so anyway, so I was blessed in that my current husband has a much more kind of a maternal kind of daddy. He used to babysit for people's babies, twin girls when we were dating. I'm like, what's up with him? So he agreed. I mean, he changed his mind during conflicts. And it was hard work, and it does affect marriages. But the things we did, he stayed home. He's an at-home parent because I made more money. We paid, we got our government money, and we used it to pay for parent helper. So for at least 8 years, we had a parent helper Monday through Thursday night from 5 to 9 o'clock. I was working at Aurora. Aurora was getting more of my time. A year after having the children, I stopped, and then I started doing contract work and made less money and can't get the loan forgiveness. But moving on, the point was that I couldn't act like I was taking care of mine and be at the hospital and taking care of theirs, and I can't be there with mine. One of my boys, because of a lot of attachment and anxiety and abandonment fears, I had to check on him every night. When 8 o'clock rolled around, if I wasn't home, I called to tell everybody good night. Always. I go in each person's room. Always. That went on for years. He found out it helped him not wet the bed. Then he started making up, oh, aren't you going to come wake me up to make sure I don't wet the bed? How come you have to go to work? How come daddy's not going? Okay? Because of that attachment, and an insecure, anxious attachment. Okay? So I had the parent helpers. We did, once the adoption people went away, that 6 months, hallelujah, there was much more touching. And yes, you can get into bed with me. They tell you to make them family, but then it's like, keep the boundaries, And I had one child, they were starting to play with each other's privates, Average, quote unquote, normal children will do sexual play. But my adopted girls came in with a history, one of them with sexual abuse, and they were doing a lot of stimulating one another, okay? And I remember a therapist coming and telling me, because we found out that they were playing house and touching, that my youngest child, girl that I adopted, shouldn't go on the first family vacation. I said, no, hell no. Well, I'm gonna have to report. The kid's been in the house for 6 months. Nobody over there at CPS thinks that her sexual stimulation has gone away in 6 months. Well, she's perpetrating. They're 8 months different. Stop using legal terms in my house. All right? The child came in with a history of abuse and neglect and sexual abuse, and you're thinking it's all gone in 6 months. Well, how can you guarantee you can protect her? I said, well, I moved rooms, but how else can I protect? I'm not going to isolate. So the other thing is I got special ed needs. Everybody who needed it. One of them, my little mischievous one, he got an IEP because he's really smart. He's got the big head. It shows you he's got a big brain. All right? But he was smart, but he always had challenges. He struggles the most with empathy. I had 5 IEPs out of 7 children. And I didn't use a psychiatrist because in my experience as a psychiatrist, especially with our children, with the trashing rooms, stealing, peeing around the house, pooping on yourself when you're angry with consequences, that was happening. That did not mean more medicine. That meant more me. It was hard, but it meant more me. It meant more touch, all right? And so I used their pediatricians, and that was because I had the advantage of being a psychiatrist. So I would go to pediatricians with their school reports and say, this is what's showing, yes, it's time to increase this dose. So the girls who were on antipsychotics, I was able to get them off of that, But after a while, because at first it was trashing rooms, my little girl, Tessie, right there, she'll stand there and look at you and say, Mama, look, and she's just peeing because she's mad because I put her in timeout. Look, Mama. I was like, oh, okay. I guess we'll clean that up when timeout is over. I'm going to reset the clock now. All right? It was hard work. We needed a parent helper. And I challenged, I know financially, I don't want to use the word privilege because y'all wasn't there when I struggled. But I had access to more money, but I gave up more money for the time with the children. And the government gave me money, and I decided it needed to be for the children. And I told my husband that was his salary for being home. And so you get to contribute to your children. And that's just the way we've spun it. And that's why I paid for parent helpers. I don't think we could have done it because we had taekwondo, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, violin, piano, attachment. We had an attachment specialist we did for psychotherapy. They would go to summer camps. I tried the taekwondo, and they were active. They had no TV during the week. No TV from Sunday night at 6 until Friday after school. And they thought we were horrible and terrible. They didn't get gaming systems until middle school or cell phones. And yes, it was a lot of control. And people debated that. And I said, wait a minute. I have to make things routine, consistent, and fair. All right? And no, everybody can't have a different meal. It's not happening. This is what we eat. Okay? And so we had weekly family meetings because we always use a behavioral modification plan. So at first we started with tokens. I used to use poker chips, and they meant a certain thing. I made one of our closets a store, so you can buy something low level. If you save, you can get the high level. And every week we sat down and talked about what people did and didn't do, and all those rules or expectations about hygiene, about school behavior, about doing your chores. All of those things were checked. And it was a family, a community discussion about how someone did. And later, as they got older, we used part of the session as a bitch session, because you had to let people talk about what somebody didn't do and what was unfair and how come this. And our family meetings would take a minimum of an hour, but we did them every week. And it takes a lot of commitment to do it. It does. So, but I think it helped people feel heard. There was division. There was aggression towards the birth daughter because she was too perfect, and still to this day she lives up to that because that's who she is. But it got her torment in the first few years of the adoption. So the girls, they got therapy over, how come I can't say the place, over on the east side, it's like an old school house. They had the grants for sexual abuse. How come I can't say it? Because they changed the name. Anyway, they went for that, and I had one of my daughters who had the clear sexual abuse would literally regress. She would release a body odor. It went a major fear response that affected her liver. And in Chinese medicine, they talk about liver and fear and urine. And she would hide under the table whenever I had to come home to take her to therapy. And it was really hard work for her. She would have flashbacks and nightmares whenever we would drive past 27th and North Avenue, because that's where she used to have the visits with the birth parents. That still to this day, at 26, can trigger her. That's how chronic, okay? She's a lot better. She used to trash the room when she would have fits. She's a lot better. She used to attack the youngest one, the birth daughter, and I'll confess, I told my oldest son, the birth son, I said, if someone attacks her again and you're here and I'm not here, this is 25th and Brown talking, I'm whooping your ass. Within a week, I came home, she screamed, ah! I'm coming to the garage, her glasses are sliding across the floor. A baby girl, Keely, with no teeth, she's crying. And Zinzi's talking about she's calling for abuse, and she's gonna call the police. But do you know that day was the last day either of the girls ever attacked a Keely? Never again, all right? And so people will talk about all this is wrong. The point is they had to get the boundary. They had to know that that boy was gonna step up and say that this is not okay. All right? Because he's kind of a passive kid. They used to pull his hair. But that day did wonders. So I want to be able to do some questions and answers. But the problems I'm going to say with the children. My oldest daughter I adopted, she has symptoms still of PTSD. It's better. She has social anxiety. She's overstimulated. We're often on the meds because she's older. What can you do? You try to fight her. She has mild intellectual disability. Her birth mother also does. So, was it lack of stimulation? But this is the one whose records I read, and they said that she was just staring at the ceiling, and it was her birth mother who was the person. But she had intellectual disability, and she had trauma, and she had been in the system herself. And she wasn't stimulated, but there was an adoptive mother who helped. And that child of my 4 forms the greatest and most healthy attachments. She had the best first 3 years out of the 4. And even with the lower IQ. She soothes herself better. She holds herself more accountable. It took years to get there, but she does it. So then my boys, and my 2 sons my 2 adopted sons, these guys right here, beautiful, sleek in the back. The boy turned 6'5", just struggle with their identity, oppositional defiant stuff, getting in trouble at school, the IEP thing, the stealing was all the time. I still have locks on my bedroom door. I still leave the house thinking I should lock my bedroom door. But I knew and I understood, and Ms. Burke said, I knew and I understood that mind of survival and always looking out for your survival was the motivation. And also the impulsivity. Can I do delayed gratification? That's hard work. All right? So yes, we got in arguments about it, and we got angry, and I get emotional because I'm not always a doctor. I'm Mama. I'm Hillary, But the line, and so they have their distance from me. But when there's in crisis, they still call. I had to put Kazi out the door, the house of youngest. I had to make them move out. But even though when there's a conflict, let's say if they go to the hospital, they call me. If something bad happened, somehow I find out. They censor it because they know I'm like a snitch. You're nothing like the police. You act like a white lady. You gonna tell everybody everything, like I just did, y'all. So anyway, all right. And so, but and then Teshi, and this is the one who gave permission to talk in detail about her. She gets occupational therapy now. This is her right here. This is my little baby right here. Now, this girl right there was about wearing a size 4 or 5. She went to Job Corps, came home wearing a size 16. I'm going to that talk next about eating and trauma and soothing. That's her soothing, dopamine, all right? And she blew up. But she finally, and she had attachment disorder, disinhibited type. There was always a new mama, a new lady, somebody new. She's doing better. We still have a conflict, but she's doing better in that she is starting to recognize it's a challenge because she's had jobs. She can get into the job, but she can't maintain the job because there's issues with her cerebellum and her balance. She has eye-hand coordination problems, slow processing speed. I had to fight the schools to do an OT assessment past elementary school. So she was 18. They said, oh, it only goes up to 17. When they did it, the lady said, oh, my God, it's really bad. And I said, oh, my God, you guys are just trying to get her out of high school. You stopped with a pencil grip, all right? You didn't get to the thing. She didn't know how to soothe. She's a kid who can walk on rocks and feel no pain. That's the sensory from the cerebellum, okay? So Teshi is now finally in therapy for OT as a young woman, knowing why she's there, and that's good progress. So my point is, even with the stuff that sounds dark and like we can't change the structure, the architecture of this brain, we can still work with that cerebellum. We can help soothe the midbrain by our behavior and our consistency and our awareness. We can mess up, but we just have to own it when we mess up and let them know, all right? And so hope, love, and faith. And we debated. I said no expectations. She's like, without expectations. And I was like, well, no expectations. You know, the point is this, is that, and that's what used to make me cry and feel like I wasn't a good mom. As my boys and the 4 children I adopted with their challenges, because I also have a son I gave birth to who has intellectual disability. He's kind of bordering on moderate and mild, okay? But with my 2 birth children, I don't have behavioral problems. They're not in legal trouble. The girl just finished college at 21. The boy's got married. He's going to have a baby. And these other guys, I worry about them. You know, I'd see the news, and I'm like, did Bakari get shot? Is he in trouble? And I used to feel like I didn't do something, or the emotional distance that I have with one of them when I'm a touchy-feely emotional person. And so I got myself to this in the last couple of years is without expectation. There isn't anything more I could do except to keep on having unconditional love and never shut my heart to them and shut them out of my house. I said, you can't live at this address, but you will always have my love. And I always want better for you, all right? So that's the end of my talk, and thank you. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
I don't have a question.
Uh-huh.
I just want to say thank you for sharing your story because on paper you sound like a woman I am unqualified to share a room with. But after hearing your story, on
Yeah.
top of all of your well-earned titles and accolades, you are a mother who is trying. Y'all need me to repeat that, okay? What I said to sis was thank you, because I thought you was like a guy, but you was a Herman like me who is trying. Thank you very much.
Exactly. Oh, yes.
I just wanted to say, you know, I might want to.
Well, we'll make it bigger.
I just want to thank you because I've talked to her, and then I lost a few weeks, and I said I lost my best friend in the whole world. I need to talk to Dr. Wynn. Yeah. But the things that I had one little boy come to me at the end of my journey because I adopted 5, and I'm a parent, biological 5, so I have 10 kids. And this little boy, he challenged me on everything. Yeah. And I couldn't wait to talk to her to calm down. Yeah. Because I knew, and the reason it didn't work out, because one of my twin girls, one of my girls live home with me. Oh, one of my girls live home with me, and she's a twin, and they didn't like what he did to me. But I could take it, but I wanted, them to, join in with me and try to help him. And it just didn't work out. And I wanted to so bad help him because that's what I do. I see the need, and in school they were passing over him, and he couldn't even read his name.
A little 7-year-old.
He didn't know his name or anything, and I was afraid they were going to pass him by, and I stuck with him. But then I had to let him go because, it wasn't just me, it was my family. Right. And this, thank you. She helped.
They're like, you raised us, you got grandkids, stop taking those other people's kids in. And that's, because the stress that she's under. And she had, and Ms. Burks, if I can say, it was very, very hard, and she felt a lot of guilt about letting this baby boy go because he was attaching to her. And sometimes you guys know what happens. It gets worse, okay? And then he focused on the other son who seemed like the good kid. And that's real common. So, but you have permission. You did your share. Anything more you do is extra. Yes, you've adopted 5, raised other 5. You did wonderful. She's going to do respite, though, y'all. She's still waiting for some babies. All right. So any other questions? Yeah. Nah. I just got people I thought were good. One person, my first one, was someone who was working at Aurora with me. Her name is Leah, and I'm going to say this because she runs her wellness. I was who she looked up to. Now I look up to her. So her wellness is a free clinic for indigenous people and people with trauma, and it's over on at Potawatomi, over there, where was it, Carroll College over there on Juneau, and it's just flourishing. So she was my first parent helper when she was working on her LPC. And so we set up structure, we rearranged the house, everything. Then the next person I had was, I had about 4 different people. One was their piano teacher, and we got him. He had a little stuff going on. He didn't like the little perfect girl, but his childhood history came out too. And then a young lady. So I always had people, but it was always, I tried my sister, and that was a big mistake. Ma, auntie's asleep and she been drinking. No, she gotta go. So anyway, but it was tag team. Someone was doing homework. We would go to the Y. You know how you can have a nanny person. That person would be doing homework while the other one was down there with the swimming class, or somebody was doing that. It was just 7 kids was a lot for 2 people. Okay, so and especially with the drama. Go ahead, Deb.
I just want to kind of speak to that.
Yes.
Being a person of color with a child with disabilities, I was faced by needing to have somebody to help me.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband and meet my children's needs and my needs. I didn't know that there was a possibility of when children that are have a diagnosis.
Yeah.
Have PTLS, which is a program, right?
Yes, I heard of that. Yeah.
Like parent helpers.
Okay. Yeah.
To have that.
Mm-hmm.
My son is not very, does have higher needs, but
Yeah.
still kind of mid. And we've got a lot of hours.
Good.
And I just want us as a community to be able to know that there's those resources
Yes.
for families, for parents
Mm-hmm.
that have children enrolled.
Right.
They don't know it.
Yeah.
Literally, the county doesn't even tell you about it.
Right.
You have to search it, you have to fight for it. But once you fight for it, you got it.
Right.
But you really do. It's like you always have to fight, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, you have to advocate. Yes.
Being a person of color or whatever it may be, you always have to fight. And
Yeah.
once you get through that fight, once you get through all the
Mm-hmm.
systems, like I think that would also help our families stay in.
Right. The point is you need a support system. And sometimes your family's not the one because the kids got too much drama and they're like, whoop his butt and do this and do that. And I had people dividing like the birth children saying, well, how can you let them do that to her? We're family. Once that adoption happened, okay? We're family. This is not part-time. There is no divorce of children. I told my husband, I'll divorce you before I divorce the children. Because when it got real bad, it felt that way. But so the point is you need support, and you have to find out who it is. And it may not be family, but somebody who's not afraid of your kids. And even if they're just there to help you on the day, you have something to do, you just need like a backup person, but to get help. Any more questions? Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, yeah.
Kind of sharing your story, talking
Yeah.
about how on an individual level,
Mhm.
we look at, we decided like her child has got their trauma and their needs versus this.
Yeah.
From your experience as a parent and a physician, what would you recommend for like the transition between your siblings that have had like that co-occurring trauma, like the sexual contact?
Right. We talked real open about these things. We talked about there is no way for me to take away that sensation that felt good because God gave it to you anyway. So now we got to talk about privates. So what I did with my birth children before I adopted, I was talking to them about private parts. I was talking, they had brothers or sisters out there who are getting hurt or bad things are happening to them, okay? So the way to work on the relationships with the birth children versus the adopted children, none of them have conflicts with the birth children. But if they have a conflict with me, they might focus on the birth child. So my oldest son, each brother broke into his apartment and stole his electronics once. Both of them. All right? Because they knew I would help him. I had set limits and boundaries with them because of their behaviors, so they took it from him to force my hand. Do you understand? So it's that, but it's not like they know that they're at a different rhythm, a different vibe, you know. And one of them even said, he said, I wish I was more like you or you were more like me. And they both agreed, my birth son and my son with the glasses, they realized that if they were a blend of each other, it would be ideal. They decided that in middle school, that conversation when they walked home from school one day, which I thought was really insightful. All right? One, my birth son has some anxiety. And the other one, he got an award in middle school for the most write-ups. That was his word. Okay? Okay? All right. So, any more time?
One more question.
Where? Okay. You should be walking around. You're my assistant. Okay.
Thank you. So my question is around behavioral therapy. I have children, they're neurodiverse, and I've spent many, many years, I'm also a former teacher, a counselor, trying to, I guess, reward them and punish them and consequence them. And at some point, it just seemed to erupt because I think for my children, my son in particular, I'm sorry, I was just asking her about behavioral therapy because it just feels like over the years with my own children that it feels like I think they feel that they're not loved because it's always so conditional. And so are there any thoughts to what could bridge between behavioral therapy, this constant reward and punishment cycle, and parenting? Because I feel, at least for me and in my household, it just seemed to be too much and got to the point that
You said so it almost felt like bribery?
it felt like bribery.
Okay.
It felt like, I
Yeah.
think for my son, it felt like he wasn't loved.
Right. Because he wasn't being successful. I went through that with some of my adopted children, so I had to change my plan. And what I did with my plan, instead of taking away, I gave them all 10 check marks. They each had a different color, and it was felt, and it was up on the wall. And each week, you all started with 10 points. And then the thought process was, I didn't take it, you gave it away. So you have to own it. You have to be accountable for that. Everybody had every single privilege after our family meeting on Sunday. And so now we're meeting again this Sunday, or this Saturday, and you didn't do your room, or we got a phone call from school, or whatever it is. And it was a community discussion. And so,
Did that affect the way they felt? Did they feel loved?
well, you know, they used to always, this is the thing when they're little, when there was trouble, how come it's always the adopted kids? And so I was young. When they were young, I made the point one day I did a reverse psychology on them. Because when they were attacking or not liking Akili or saying I was doing the youngest girl right in the middle. And so I did a thing. I pulled my own adopted kids, and then she was another one. I said, come here, I got to talk to y'all. What? I said, tell me what Akili's doing. They said, what? She's doing something. Well, why you said that? I said, you love me? I said, yeah. You know I love her? Yeah. You wouldn't be mean to her unless she was doing something and she's just slick and sneaky. Tell me what it is. You're not a snitch. And they looked at each other, what? And I said, well, what? And they said, she ain't do nothing. And I said, what is it? And then three of them together. I said, well, what is your problem with her? Three of them at the same time said, she's too perfect. Okay? So when they got into their teens and the adopted things, especially through high school, when that adopted thing comes, why is it always adopted ones? I turn that right back on them. Yes, why? You need to learn about why. I know why. You learn why. It's your turn. It's not always about me. I didn't create that. Now you have to own it. You're at 20. You're 21. You got legal problems. Why? All right? And then you get mad and you ain't nothing, I ain't crazy. Okay. All right. So that's what happens. And so with your birth children, they have to own it. You know? They have to own it. The one who's cutting up and not getting everything, he knows he's cutting up. He's making it your fault that you're not giving him praise for inappropriate behavior. Don't let him do it. Okay? And there's always a little black sheep in the family. At least somebody always feels like they're the black sheep in the family. It's going to happen. There's going to be sibling rivalry in the best case scenario, you know? So, but don't let him do that to you, because you know that you're not doing it out of spite, or that you have somebody's getting preferential treatment. I told them, I said, why should I have a conflict with the kid who's not giving me trouble? They got mad at Keita. I said, she did everything I wish, and it was what she wanted, but why wouldn't I jubilate? When you're older, I don't give my money to people just because. My love is there no matter what. But she went to college, yay. She went to black college, yay, yay. She graduated, yay. She got A's, yay. I'm supposed to mistreat her for that. Right, so let them know that. It's like, and you can turn it around, like, what kind of consequence? That's when they were younger. I used to say, what the birth children, I used to ask my adopted children, what kind of consequence do you think Nico should have today for that lie he told me? I would get them involved in it when we had family meetings. Okay? So just helping them to be accountable. All right? I thank you. I'm sure we're late, and it's going to make you late for the next one. Oh, we're right on. Thank you, assistant. That's my lovely niece. I'll say that again. All right. Thank you very much.